Thank you for inviting me to present my film, When We Starve, to the Boston community. I'm honored to have this opportunity to show this project as a lead into Professor Sihirchuk's discussion on the Holodomor. My name is Borys Buniak. I am a physician in the Syracuse area. I am currently the Umana president of the Central New York chapter. I'm a former president of Umana for North America from 2015 to 2017. But this whole project on When We Starve started in 2017 when I was asked by the U.S. Holodomor Committee to develop a compelling educational narrative to illustrate the disturbing effects of starvation on a human body. And this process, tragically, was endured by many Ukrainians during the Holodomor. Myself, as a gastroenterologist, I see many individuals with multiple eating disorders, even cancer patients who are dying of starvation. We basically watch the process of, it's pretty agonizing to watch people starve to death. And those are just medical starvation. Now, the Holodomor, there was a forced starvation. Food was available, but it was taken away from them. So it was also a psychological impact on the individual during the Holodomor, which I wanted to illustrate somehow in the film. And we've shown this film to several experts, including in Canada. We went to several universities, and they've looked at the film and they helped me edit it to make it more impactful so it can be shown in a high school, can be shown to middle school, and also can be shown at the university level. And we so far have shown this film at Lemoyne, Syracuse University. We've been to Miami-Dade College. We've shown it in LA, we've shown it in Washington, Philadelphia. It is currently on the Holodomor bus in Toronto, so it's everybody in Canada can see the movie on the Holodomor bus. So I'm hoping that when you watch the movie, you'll see how an individual deteriorates from a robust individual down to someone who is emaciated, psychologically broken, spiritually broken, and it shows you the devastation and the horror of what it is like to starve to death. Just think about our everyday lives. There's food everywhere in the country. You can go to supermarket, convenience store, gas stations. There is a McDonald's or Starbucks somewhere on every corner. So we can find food everywhere. And in modern times, there should be no such thing as starvation. And we all know during the Holodomor, there were opportunities to provide food, but it was disallowed. So that type of psychological deterioration is very devastating, and hopefully that will come out in this film. The way I developed this film, first of all, I'm not a director. I've never directed a film, so obviously I needed a lot of help. Fortunately, I found two students from University of Southern California School of Cinematic Arts. His name was Carmen Emmy and Anna Romano. They both guided me and helped me through the process of making this documentary. And we're able to also involve many other cinematographers. We also used animation. So a lot of these Americans were able to help me with this project. And it was interesting that the fact that I picked non-Ukrainians to make the film had a benefit in that I was able to show what happens and reveal what the Holodomor was to a population that has never heard of it. And I was actually quite taken aback when they were and I was quite surprised that many of them didn't even charge me for certain parts of the project. And so it made the film not as expensive as initially the budget was going to be. So I'm very grateful to the group of young professionals to help me develop this film. So this film was being shown to many universities right before the pandemic. And after the pandemic, obviously everything slowed down. So I've only had an opportunity to show the film a couple of times over the last 2 years. So I'm happy that this is one of the projects that hopefully you'll get a perspective of what I was trying to accomplish. So I hope this film reveals the cruelty of the Holodomor and other genocides to the world, because there are many people who are starved to death by their perpetrators. And I'm hoping that the more people see this film, they will show this to their relatives, their friends, and try to get this into the educational system. I mean, I have shown this film in several high schools, private high schools. It's hard to get them into the public school system, but we are trying that with the Holodomor committee to try to get into the public school system. And so far, we're making some inroads. So our slogan is Ukraine remembers, the world acknowledges. And I'm hoping this film is impactful, and then hopefully it will prevent tragedies in the future from occurring. Thank you once again for allowing me to present this film. And if any questions, I'm sure you can speak to Vsevolod, and he can always give you my email, and we can have further discussions. Thank you very much.
We have to eat. We like to eat. Eating makes us feel good. Mealtimes are events when the whole family or community comes together. Birthdays, picnics, holidays, and weddings. Food is also an occasion for sharing, for distributing and giving, for the expression of altruism, whether from parents to children or anyone, from visitors to strangers. Thus, food becomes a symbol of not only security, but friendship. It's hard for most of us in the developed world to starve. Everywhere we look, food is available. Now, imagine being placed in a situation where food is deprived.
During the Holodomor, there was nothing to eat. There was nothing in the store. Couldn't buy anything. Nothing was ever brought to us. Nobody would deliver anything to the village. Every day the brigade came. The same people each time took everything we had. They probably wondered how much longer we could last.
The word Holodomor means basically to kill with hunger. It was a designed genocide against the Ukrainian people from 1932 to 1933. Joseph Stalin ruthlessly confiscated land, livestock, and food from peasants and farmers who refused to join collective farms. Stalin claimed the objective was to gather food and distribute it evenly throughout the Soviet Union. Tragically, he had other plans. Stalin closed the borders and forced the Ukrainians who refused to become members of government-run collective farms to starve to death. In other words, Stalin used food as a weapon of mass destruction to impose government ideology. He stated the death of one person is a tragedy, the death of many is a statistic. By design, Stalin's intention was to eliminate the farmers and peasants of Ukraine who opposed Soviet rule.
In Ukraine during the Holodomor, the food was taken away from the people. They had nothing to eat.
As one cousin related to me, her horrible memories of crawling on the ground in the winter of 1932-33, scratching the frozen soil with her fingernails, trying to find a single onion to make soup for her family.
In a genocidal experience like that of the Holodomor, there were millions of deaths. People were dropping like flies. That expression means that basically sacred human beings were becoming like insects, deprived of their God-given human dignity.
Hunger affects people physically. It causes the skin to stretch. It causes the stomach to swell. Famously, it causes all kinds of other diseases. People become ill from hunger.
Without food, the body will go through 3 phases of starvation. During the first phase of starvation, the body will use glycogen or sugars, which are stored in the liver and muscles, as their primary source of energy. There is enough glycogen to last about 6 hours between meals, and the brain in particular needs this glucose to maintain the control over the bodily functions. People become hungry and irritable when sugars are depleted. In the second phase of starvation, the body begins to burn fats. Fats or fatty acids are then metabolized by the liver to form ketone bodies, which then become the primary source of energy. During this ketosis phase, as we call it, the breath acquires a fruity odor and bodily functions slow down to conserve energy. The heart rate, respirations, temperatures all decrease, but could return back to normal in the face of danger or if there is an opportunity to obtain food. Once fats are depleted, the body enters the agonizing third phase of starvation. During this phase, the body is forced to cannibalize itself by breaking down its own proteins to survive. Muscles, the largest source of protein, are used up first before internal organs are slowly eaten away. People will become weak, apathetic, and often hallucinate during this phase. This weakness makes it increasingly difficult to take a breath, walk, digest food, fight off infection, or even think. People die of infection or when the heart is simply too weak to keep on pumping. This whole process may keep people alive for up to 70 days without food.
Whenever we walk, whenever we move, whenever we speak, whenever we blink, we use up energy. And we receive that energy from food. It's the calories of the food that we eat.
Some of the physical signs of starvation, you'll see the fat's depleted around your eyeballs, so you have sunken eyeballs. The fat in your temples will also become depleted, so you have sunken in temples as well. Dryness of the skin, flaking of the skin, brittle nails. Their skin becomes a little pale. Their hair becomes a little brittle as well, and they also starts losing color.
Psychologically, the same thing happens with their thoughts. Food becomes from an overvalued idea to an obsession to becoming the dominant theme in their lives.
It makes people lose normal human relations, normal contacts. The law-abiding people become thieves. Loving mothers turn against their children. It creates almost a kind of insanity. People who become very hungry become unable to think of anything else except food.
A human being is integrated, a body, a soul, a spirit. When starvation attacks the body, it touches also the soul, the emotions, the psyche, the spiritual life of the person.
My father-in-law actually lived through the Holodomor. Many of his brothers and sisters died during the Holodomor. And he would tell us the stories of the fact that they didn't have any food at all. The food was taken away from them by the NKVD. They went into the woods and they tried to eat things like bark and acorns, but there really isn't any caloric value to those foods.
And very often along the way, people who are starving begin to use what are called food substitutes, meaning grass, weeds, acorn, cattle feed, manure, which are at best benign, but at worst can be toxic to the body and to the brain.
As they had less and less calories, they felt weaker and weaker. He remembers how his mother couldn't even lift up her head off the bed. He remembers how his brothers would fall into deep sleeps and it'd be very hard to wake them up. They couldn't move them. And in time, it happened that they just didn't wake up.
As I recall that 33rd year of horror that shattered skulls, I can't forget that time when death was by starvation. Everywhere, the old and young, bare, swollen legs, while nearby, a teenager embraces his lifeless mother.
There are two types of starvation. Marasmus is severe malnutrition from caloric deficiency.
Kids who, or even adults who have marasmus look much older than they really are. So they've seen starving children in their 12 or 13, they look like they're 60 or 70 years old. So even if you try to refeed people with marasmus, you have to be very careful with them, because if you refeed them too quickly, they actually may die because of the fluid shifts that you provide them with the wrong type of food.
Kwashiorkor is severe protein malnutrition.
So there's not enough protein in the diet. You can't build up your organs, you can't build up your muscles. And they're very thirsty during those times, and you start drinking a lot of fluid. And if you drop fluid intake to the point that you start to swell, their belly will get bigger, their feet get all swollen. So they have stunted growth, their mental ability gets decreased as well. But kwashiorkor is actually a little bit easier to treat because they're still eating something, but just not eating the right types of foods. But if you give them protein early enough, most of them will actually get better.
So if during the critical windows of development, you would deprive the brain severely, you can compensate to a large degree, but very often not completely. There is a cost which stays on that generation.
I remember they collected homeless children from the streets, and I could see them as they brought them in. We looked through the door, and they were bunk beds all through the whole thing, and they were just lying without any motion and looking at the ceiling. We could not, as children, understand it. But my mother saw going to work in the morning, how they would bring those children during the day, but in the morning, dead bodies collected and dumped in the trucks.
Those people who did survive the Holodomor and the ones that were able to get through it, when they started getting food again, one of the problems is that you can't go full force and eat full meals because the body has adjusted itself to having less calories, less water. As you know, and we say in colloquial terms, your stomach shrinks. You can't eat as much in one sitting. So one of the things that they would have to do is eat smaller amounts more frequently and definitely resupply their body with a lot of vitamins and nutrients that had been missing. Those people who then started getting food, if they overstuffed themselves, they sometimes became quite ill just because they were eating too much right at the same time, or they weren't eating the right foods to build up their strength again. So there was a time afterwards where you had to learn how to be able to eat again so that you were eating the right foods and in the right balance to get your body back into its normal functioning.
Even if you feed them, after about 3 months, they can pretty much be back to the normal state. But psychologically, their concentrating ability and their thought process still lags behind.
But that emotion was then carried through the next 2 generations because they would, in their homes, often share what had happened. Even the 3rd generation still had that horror. The other emotions they often had were fear. Fear that what happened could recur again, and also a lifelong fear of speaking out. They feared being assertive, so they spent their lives essentially at a level below the one they wanted to operate on.
In the end, the Holodomor took away not only the life of those people that starved to death, but it also took away the future generations, the ability of them to be born, and also the ability for Ukraine to expand its population rather than decrease its population.
For a long time, they could not even talk about sharing their thoughts. But in every family, there was somebody that lost life during the Holodomor. We have a mission here to let people know what hunger was and that it was artificially created famine, because it was. Everything was confiscated.
In his book, Bloodlands, Dr. Timothy Snyder, he says, this was not an act of God, but of politics, and therefore of humanity.
Standing before the phenomenon of genocide, we raise up our hands. We ask the Lord why. I think that is what people enduring and dying during the Holodomor did.
We often think that these terrible events end with the death of the afflicted individual. But we know from other work that this kind of tragedy tends to echo through the generations afterwards. And again, I would hope that some of the people in positions of power in academia look at this in a very careful way and look for ways that have worked other systems to mitigate those effects.
We remember these victims. This was a man-made famine. This could have been avoided.